In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to take your chords from sounding like this to sounding like this. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to make your own instruments from scratch using Ableton Live. A lot of the stuff I'm going to be using is in Ableton Live Suite. This is the version of Ableton that gives you access to all of the instruments and effects that they have. So you're going to be able to really build your own instruments with this, and it's going to be super cool. So there's a lot of different techniques that I've sort of picked up for how to design your own custom sounds. I'm going to start by going through this demo and showing you how I designed it, and then we're going to be designing our own instrument from scratch. So without any further ado, let's get into Ableton and get into the video. So this first example I showed you is just a basic sine wave, and this is coming from Operator, which is where a lot of the sounds that I design in Ableton are actually going to be coming from. It's literally just a sine wave, but it honestly sounds kind of cool just because I think that these chords sound really interesting. But let's take a look at the instrument that I've sort of designed here, and I've called it Warm Sine Chords because I just think it sounds really nice, and it sounds like this. You can see I have all these knobs set up in here. These are macros, and that's something that we'll get into later. But let's go ahead and open this up and look at what we've got inside. So this is a instrument rack in Ableton, and this is what we're going to be using to create all of the instruments in this video. It basically allows you to group any number of instruments and effects together and create your own custom instruments. So we are starting with the same synth operator, and the first thing in your instrument rack is pretty much always going to be the instrument. So I'm going to call it the sound source. If we go into our instruments tab in the Ableton browser, we've got about 10 to choose from, and if you have Ableton 11, you've actually got even more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and turn off all of the effects so we just have what is coming from this operator. So you can hear that right off the bat, we already have pretty much the most of the sound that we're going for, even once I turn on all of these effects. So that is going to be my first point, is that you want to start with a pretty decent idea of what your sound is going to be right from the source, and then you're going to use different effects to polish and shape the sound into your final product. So I'm going to very quickly go over some different ways you can shape the sound in your sound source before you even go into adding any effects. And I'm going to show you some of the stuff I've done and some of the stuff that a lot of these instruments in Ableton can do. I've added on this spread knob in Operator to create some stereo width. I've got this glide turned on and the pitch envelope at 17% so that notes are going to sort of slide down when they trigger. I've also got this filter drive turned up to 9 decibels, so that is adding a lot of harmonics to the sound. I've also got this LFO that is modulating the pitch up and down 4% very slowly so that we have this nice wobble sort of lo-fi effect that's going on. So all of those are different ways you can color your sound, and then you can also make sounds more dynamic, and what I mean is responsive to different velocities. So there's a couple of different things you can immediately assign to velocity in Operator. You've got a velocity on each oscillator, so this percentage is going to control how much the volume increases or decreases when the velocity is higher or lower. I've also got time mapped to the velocity, so that means that when you hit it softer, the attack and decay is going to be slower. And you can also map that to the pitch envelope and the filter. So mapping things to velocity, increasing stereo width, adding harmonics through distortion, adding pitch glide or different movement to the sound. These are all ways that you can make your sounds more dynamic and interesting starting from the source. So now let's move into the effects sections. I like to think about effects in 3 different ways. You have your tonal effects, things like EQ or saturation, which are going to change the harmonics of the sound. More aggressive distortion and bit crushing effects all count as tonal effects and are ways that you can drastically change the sound. Then you have your dynamic effects. These are things like compressors, limiters, also saturation if you use a clipper. Those are all ways to shape the dynamics of your sound. You can also do this in the source with the envelopes, so that is another way to shape the dynamics. Last, you have space effects, and I just count space effects as anything that is going to impact the stereo width. So that means things like reverbs, also chorus or flangers or phasers, Even Ableton's utility has a width knob and a mono function, so anything that's going to change the stereo spread is going to count as a space effect. So those are kind of the categories of effects. So let's look at what I've actually put onto this sound and talk about what they're doing. So first we've got this EQ. This is a tonal effect. This is cutting off the sub frequencies and reducing our lows a little bit. Then we've got a utility, and this is going to increase or decrease the width a little bit. Then we've got this grain delay, and this is actually adding sort of a shimmer effect, an octave up. Then we have this vocoder, and this vocoder is just sort of changing the timbre. And if you set Ableton's vocoder to the modulator setting, it's just going to change the sound in a really interesting way. Next we've got a reverb. I've just got it on a short decay time, filtering out a lot of frequencies, and with this chorus turned up pretty high, so that's adding some more stereo width. Then we've got another EQ. This is just doing a low cut. And finally OTT, this is on a pretty high percent, and I've got the lows turned down, so this is just kind of giving us some more high end. So once you've got your sound source and added effects, the last step to making an instrument is adding macros. And you don't have to do this, but I just think it's a really interesting way to get some presets that you can use in all your tracks and have some parameters that you can shape the sound for any song. So I've got 5 parameters set up here, and you can set up 8, or you can set up as many parameters as you want in Ableton 11. And you can see that I've got them mapped to a whole bunch of different parameters within our instrument rack. And what's cool is that you aren't limited to parameters within your sound source. You can also use them to turn any knob in any of the effects in this entire rack. So you can turn one knob, like this brightness knob, and we're changing the volume, tone, level, and drive within operator here, but then we're also changing the dry wet on the grain delay and the amount of the OTT, all with one knob turn. And when it comes to making macros, it doesn't help if they just do random things. So I like to think about making macros for basic things like stereo width, the length of a sound, or the attack, a filter cutoff, but it can also be anything that you think would be useful to automate during a song. For example, I've got this noise layer in the sound, and sometimes you don't want any extra noise from an instrument, so you can turn that off, or you can turn it up even higher. I've also got this detune parameter because the synth sort of has this wobble effect from the LFO, and sometimes you want your sounds to be more in tune with everything else. I've got this brightness knob that's just adding some FM and some OTT, and I think that having that up in this mix works really well, but there are other mixes where I know I want to have this sound a lot darker. Just any ways you can think that would be interesting to change the sound and shape it further are good options for macros. So now let's go ahead and build our own instrument, and I'm going to kind of go through the steps and show you how I design instruments and how I go around sculpting a sound to create something unique. So I'm in my default set, and the first thing we're going to need is a bit of a chord progression or some notes for our instrument to follow. So I'm going to go ahead and come up with a chord progression on my piano that I have in my default set here, and then we're going to move it onto our new instrument. So that sounds really cool. Let's go ahead and bring that down to our MIDI track, which right now is empty. The first step is to pick your instrument. I'm gonna go ahead and go with Simpler on another track. And the way that designing an instrument works with Simpler is you're gonna take a one shot of a note that is tuned somewhere, and Cymatics makes packs of one shots that are all tuned to C, and so do a lot of sample companies that you can find. So I can just go through these one shots and pick something that sounds good and use that as my sound source in Simpler. So that sounds really cool, and that's just our sound source. You can see quite a few controls in Simpler that match the ones in Operator. So we've got this filter, and we have the same drive option that we have in Operator. We also have this LFO that can be assigned to the volume, pitch, pan, or the filter. So that can be an interesting way to shape our sound further. Let's go ahead and use this filter and see what we can do with that. But I'm going to turn up the velocity sensitivity a little bit, and maybe this glide. Let's see what that sounds like. I was messing around with a lot of things there, but I think that sounds good, sort of the way it is. So let's go ahead and move on to the second step, which is going to be adding our effects. So we've got a really involved sort of basis for our sound already. It's already got some movement, it's already got some dynamics to it, and of course we can cut out some very lows. I don't think we're gonna have any sub frequencies in here. We've got some interesting sounds in the high end. I'm gonna bring that out a little bit. We can also take out just some of the mids here because we don't really need them as much. So we've just very basically sculpted our sound a little bit. Let's go ahead and add in our saturators. I'm not gonna use this as a distortion. I'm gonna use it more of a saturation to add some more harmonics to our sound. So that's cool. This sound already has some reverb on it, but I'm gonna add a tiny bit more just to add some space to this sound. I'm gonna try and do something a little bit more extreme now. I'm gonna add on some redux. This is a big crushing effect. I like just throwing it onto things to see what it sounds like because it can really dramatically change your sound, but it doesn't always sound good. But I really like that a lot. Let's keep going. Let's add on a little bit of delay. I don't want to go too overboard with effects, so I think that's probably going to do it for right now. So we've got mostly tonal effects on here. We've got an EQ, a saturator, a redux, another EQ, and an erosion at the end. So yeah, now that we've got our sound and our effects in, the last step is to assign some macros. The first thing I'm going to do is assign this redux to a macro because that really has a massive effect on the sound. And I'm going to assign this erosion to the same macro because it sort of is doing the same thing. And I liked that erosion sitting around 16, so I'm going to have the max be like 20 and the minimum be 0 so that we just get rid of the erosion at the bottom. And I'm gonna do pretty much the same thing with the other one, with the redux. I liked it sitting around 13 at the bottom. Let me change it so it's like that, and then have it all the way off at the top. So at the bottom, we're not really getting any of that bit crusher sound, but at the top, we're getting a lot of it. And I'm gonna call this bit crush. And you can right click on it to give it a color. And you know, you can color it something that looks like a nice bit crushing color, like pink. Let's keep going here and let us get a cutoff knob. So we're gonna assign the filter in our simpler here, and we're also going to assign our saturator amount because this saturator is also going to give us a little bit of extra high end if we increase the drive. And I'm going to go ahead and also decrease the output an equivalent amount. So we've got the filter frequency. I like where it was sitting around 3000 at the bottom. Let's go like 2300. And at the top, yeah, sure, let's try all the way open, just all the way up at the top. And then the drive, I like it being 0 at the bottom. And then maybe let's do like 4 at the top and -4. Oh, and I think I also definitely need to assign our our filter drive to that same macro. So let's go like 7 at the top and 0 at the bottom. I'm also going to do this high boost to the same one. So this is just going to affect the brightness of the sound. Let's go maybe 4 or 5 on the top. Let's go 5. And then 0 on the bottom. So we can see everything's increasing here. So let's go ahead and call this brightness or just bright and make it orange. That's a nice bright color. I'm gonna do a width knob because we've got this chorus at the end that's gonna make everything super wide, and I want to have the option to have that off because it's gonna change the sound a lot. I'm also going to map the stereo parameter on our reverb to that. I'm going to assign our random panning to that because I want to have that you know, off at the bottom. And I'm also going to assign this stereo low cut to the width. Oh, I'm also going to assign our delay to that. Actually, I'm just going to assign the ping pong value of the delay so that at the bottom, it's not going to be ping ponging anymore. And the way you do that is you set the value you want it to be off at as 1. So if I want it to be off at the bottom, then 1 would be at the bottom. And if I want it to be off at the top, 1 would be at the top, and the other value is 0. Just a way to, you know, turn things on and off when a value is all the way down in your macros. And the very last parameter I'm going to do is a space parameter, and this is just going to turn on and off our reverb and delay. So let me go ahead and do that. There we go. Now we've made our own custom instrument. We can name it and save it. I'm going to call this 8-bit bells or 8-bit pluck. And if you click on this save, it's going to save it in your user library under instrument rack. And there you have it. Now you've got an instrument that you can open up in any of your projects. It's going to open up just like this with all of the macros defaulting to wherever you had them when you saved it. Now, whenever I open this up, it's going to open up a new instance of it. So yeah, that's pretty much how you do it. That's how I make instruments from scratch in Ableton. I'm gonna go ahead and cook up a beat with that melody, and I will play it for you guys in a second. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that it inspired you to go and design your own instruments. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Kill 'em.